welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really powerful strategy for business owners. We're talking about irrevocable trusts.
Yes, and how they can really help protect what you've worked so hard to build. Think of it like creating, a secure zone around your most vital business assets.
Exactly. We've looked at some great sources: Investopedia, Kiplinger, Federal Lawyer, Dominion, Asset Protection Planners, to kind of pull this all together.
Right, and our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack what these irrevocable trusts really are.
Make them less intimidating.
Yeah, exactly. Explain why they're so important, especially, if you're thinking about potential lawsuits or creditors.
And help you, the listener, figure out how to even start thinking about this for your own business without getting lost in all the legal jargon.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this term, irrevocable trust, it sounds permanent.
Hmm.
It may be a bit complicated. Let's try an analogy.
Correct.
Imagine you've got, say, essential tools for your business, maybe some really specialized machinery, or your delivery trucks, or even the building you operate out of. Really key stuff.
Okay, I got it. Your core assets.
Right. Now imagine putting all that into a super strong locked storage unit. A vault, maybe?
Uh-huh.
And you give the only key to someone you trust completely, like a designated manager.
A trustee in legal terms.
Exactly, trustee. Once those assets are in that locked unit, you can't just walk up and take them back whenever you feel like it.
And critically.
Critically, neither can someone else who might have a claim against you personally or against your business. That's the basic idea, right?
That's it in a nutshell. You're legally transferring the ownership of those high-risk assets into this locked box, the trust.
Managed by the trustee.
Managed by the trustee, correct? And because you no longer legally own them directly, well, they become much harder for potential legal threats to get their hands on.
That shift in legal ownership seems to be the absolute core of it.
It really is. As Investopedia points out, when those key business assets, maybe the shares in your company or major investments or that essential equipment, are legally owned by the trust.
But are not in your name anymore.
Precisely. They're off your personal balance sheet, so to speak. And that's what gives the strategy its real protective power.
So if a lawsuit pops up or creditors start calling,
those assets held by the trust are generally outside the reach of your personal or even business liabilities because the trust is the legal owner, not you.
okay, so drilling down on that, why should you, our listener, really be paying close attention here? Let's paint that what-if picture.
Yeah, the scenario nobody wants but needs to consider.
You've spent years, maybe decades, pouring everything into your business.
Yeah.
It's your livelihood, your passion, maybe your legacy project.
It's more than just a job for most entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. But what if something unexpected happens? A serious lawsuit, maybe completely unforeseen, or a sudden, sharp downturn hits your industry.
These things happen, unfortunately.
And that fear, the fear of losing the critical things, the equipment, the property, maybe even the business itself, that's a real tangible worry for a lot of business owners.
Mm-hmm. And that's where this idea of the trust acting like you called it a superhero shield earlier.
Yeah, a shield for your business.
It really can function that way. Sources like Federal Lawyer and Dominion emphasize this. It's a robust layer of protection specifically for those high-stakes situations.
Because you acted before the trouble started.
Exactly. By proactively moving ownership into the trust, you're building a legal firewall before there's a fire. It's just smart risk management, planning ahead.
Okay, let's break down the key benefits then. Number one, obviously, is the asset protection we've been discussing.
Right. The big one.
So, just to be crystal clear, putting those high-risk assets, the business itself potentially, key investments, essential equipment, maybe the building into an irrevocable trust removes them from your personal name.
And Asset Protection Planners really highlights this. The trust becomes its own separate legal entity, like a container.
A very strong container.
A very strong container, yes. So because you don't own the contents directly anymore, it's much, much harder for someone suing you or your business to claim those specific assets. The lawsuit targets you, not this separate legal box.
The legal separation is just fundamental.
It's everything for protection. And it doesn't stop there. Kiplinger points out potential tax advantages, too.
Ah, okay. How so?
Well, because those assets are no longer technically part of your personal estate when you pass away.
They might not be counted for estate tax purposes.
Exactly. Estate taxes can be significant. So this could mean more of the wealth you've built actually stays with your family or beneficiaries instead of going to the tax authorities.
That makes sense. And you mentioned beneficiaries. That leads into planning for the future, right?
Absolutely. Trusts are, by design, tools for managing and distributing assets according to your wishes.
So you can use an irrevocable trust to make sure your business assets or their value go to the right people, kids, family, charity.
And often more smoothly, potentially avoiding the costs and delays of the probate process, which is the court process for settling an estate.
But there's a trade-off here, isn't there? This word irrevocable.
There is, and it's a big one you need to understand up front. When you put assets into an irrevocable trust, you generally give up direct control over them.
You can't just change your mind easily.
Not easily, no. That's why it's called irrevocable. You appoint a trustee who has the legal duty to manage those assets based on the rules you set up in the trust document.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Tell us about Sam's story.
Right, Sam. He owned a construction company, doing pretty well, lots of heavy equipment, trucks the backbone of his business.
High value, high risk assets in that industry.
Definitely, Sam knew that.
Yeah.
So he talked to experts, set up an irrevocable trust, and legally transferred ownership of his trucks and that key equipment into the trust.
Okay, proactive move.
Very proactive. Then, down the road, unfortunately, his company got hit with a major lawsuit. It was a serious situation. But, and here's the key part, because those trucks and the equipment were legally owned by the trust, not by Sam or his company directly.
They were shielded.
They were shielded from the lawsuit's claims. His personal assets were safe, and the assets in the trust were protected. It allowed the business to keep running despite the legal fight.
That really drives home the point about acting before there's a problem.
Absolutely. It wasn't some last-minute scramble. It was strategic planning. And that highlights something crucial from several sources. Timing matters. Generally, the earlier you set up a trust like this, the better the protection.
Okay, so for our listeners thinking maybe this is something I should look into, what are the practical first steps?
First step, take stock. Really look hard at your business and identify those high-risk assets. What keeps you up at night?
Make a list.
Make a list. Your main vehicles, specialized machinery, the building if you own it, significant business investments, maybe even valuable intellectual property like patents or trademarks. What's most vulnerable if things go sideways?
Got it. Identify the crown jewels, so to speak. What's next?
Next, and this is non-negotiable, you must talk to a qualified trust and estate lawyer.
Not a DIY project.
Definitely not. You need expert legal advice tailored to your specific business, your assets, your state's laws. They'll help you understand the nuances and set it up correctly for your goals.
And when you have that conversation, I gather there isn't just one kind of irrevocable trust.
That's right. As Kiplinger mentions, there are different flavors. Some are laser-focused on asset protection. Others might prioritize minimizing estate taxes.
Some might even let you get income from the assets.
Yes, some can be structured that way. Your lawyer's job is to help you figure out which type or combination makes the most sense for what you're trying to achieve.
Another layer of complexity seems to be where you set up the trust.
A very important point, highlighted by federal lawyer in Dominion, jurisdiction matters.
Meaning which state or even which country.
Exactly. Some U.S. states have laws that are more favorable for trusts than others. And then there's the option of setting up an offshore trust in a jurisdiction known for incredibly strong asset protection laws.
Sounds complicated.
It can be, which is why expert guidance here is crucial. The location can significantly impact how effective the trust is.
And looping back to that word irrevocable, we need to hammer home the no-takebacks rule, right?
Absolutely vital. Once you transfer those assets into the trust, you generally lose direct control. You can't just decide 6 months later, oops, I want that building back in my name.
The trustee manages it according to the rules you set initially.
Correct. It's managed for your benefit and your beneficiary's benefit based on the legal document you created. But direct personal control is gone. It's a serious commitment.
That is a huge point to digest, though, you mentioned earlier, it might be possible to still get income.
Yes, Kiplinger touched on that. Depending on the specific type of trust and how it's drafted, you might be able to structure it so you receive income generated by the trust assets.
Without messing up the protection.
Potentially, yes. But again, that's a detailed conversation for your lawyer to ensure it's done correctly without undermining the core purpose.
Okay. Beyond the main asset protection, what are some other advantages we should touch on? You mentioned taxes earlier.
Right, let's revisit that. We talked about estate taxes. There can also be benefits related to gift taxes. Proper planning might allow you to transfer significant value out of your taxable estate over time.
helping more wealth stay within the family or go to intended causes.
Exactly, instead of a large chunk potentially going to taxes.
And let's dig a bit more into creditor protection. How strong is that barrier?
It's generally very strong because, again, you don't own the assets in the trust. So if a creditor comes after you for a personal debt or even some business debts,
They usually can't touch what's inside the trust.
they generally can't seize those specific assets. And asset protection planners notes you can even write specific rules into the trust document itself, spendthrift provisions, for example, designed to prevent creditors from accessing the assets or distributions. Another layer of defense.
Plus, there's an element of control, but in a different way, legacy control.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. The trust lets you dictate exactly how and when your beneficiaries receive the assets.
So not just lump sums, maybe.
Right. You could set conditions like reaching a certain age or provide for distributions over time. It ensures your assets are managed and passed on according to your long-term vision and values.
Okay, but we need balance. Let's talk downsides or things to be really aware of. We keep coming back to loss of control.
It's the biggest one. You are giving up direct management and access. That requires immense trust in your chosen trustee, whether it's a person or an institution.
And it's not free, right? There are costs involved.
Absolutely. Setting up a trust properly requires skilled legal work, and that costs money. There might also be ongoing administrative fees for the trustee's services, depending on the setup.
You're paying for expertise and that legal shield.
You are. It's an investment in protection.
What about those gift taxes you mentioned? Could transferring assets into the trust trigger a tax bill right away?
It potentially could, yes. If the value of the assets you transfer exceeds the annual gift tax exclusion or your lifetime exemption, there could be gift tax implications.
Careful planning is needed there too. Maybe involving a tax advisor alongside the lawyer?
Highly recommended. You need a coordinated strategy to understand and hopefully minimize any immediate tax hits.
And finally, you mentioned look-back periods. What's that about?
Right. This is important, especially for things like qualifying for government benefits later in life, like Medicaid for long-term care.
How does the trust affect that?
Well, there's often a waiting period, frequently 5 years after you transfer assets into an irrevocable trust, before those assets are no longer counted against you for Medicaid eligibility.
So you can't just set up a trust right before you need nursing home care and expect it to work for Medicaid.
Generally, no. The government looks back several years. It really emphasizes the need to do this kind of planning well in advance, not as a crisis measure.
Okay, let's look at a couple more examples just to see the versatility. What about something modern like crypto?
Good question. Let's imagine Lisa. She has a business, but she's also done well with cryptocurrency investments.
Okay.
She's worried about two things: hackers potentially stealing her crypto, and maybe a future lawsuit against her unrelated business.
So she sets up an irrevocable trust.
Works with her lawyer, sets one up, and legally transfers her crypto holdings into it. Now, those assets have a layer of protection against both digital theft directed at her personally and potentially against claims arising from her other business activities.
Interesting. And what about using a trust for charity?
Definitely possible. Consider Mike. Built a successful company, wants to give back, but also needs income during retirement.
A common situation.
He could set up something like an irrevocable charitable remainder trust. He transfers assets in. The trust pays him an income stream for his lifetime.
And then what happens?
And then, after he passes away, whatever is left in the trust, the remainder goes to the charity he designated.
So he gets income and the charity gets a future donation.
Exactly. It meets both financial needs and philanthropic goals. It shows how flexible these tools can be when structured properly.
These examples really show they aren't just one size fits all, are they?
Not at all. They can be tailored for asset protection, tax planning, charitable goals, legacy planning, often a combination of these.
Okay, let's anticipate some questions listeners might have right now. We touched on income, just to confirm. You can potentially get income from assets in the trust.
Yes. Often that's possible. Depending on the trust type and how it's drafted, you can structure it to receive income generated by the assets, even though you don't directly own them anymore.
And changing the trust later, we said it's hard, but is it impossible?
Irrevocable means it's generally very difficult. Major changes usually need agreement from all the beneficiaries involved. Sometimes court approval might be needed.
So the takeaway is plan carefully up front. Get it right the first time.
Absolutely critical. Assume you won't be able to easily change it later.
And is this only for the super rich? If you own a smaller business, is it relevant?
Definitely relevant. It's not about having millions upon millions. It's about having assets, a business, property, equipment that are valuable to you and that you want to protect from risk.
So any business owner with significant assets they want to shield should at least consider it.
I'd say so, yes. It's a tool worth exploring, regardless of your absolute net worth. It's about protecting what you've built.
Last question maybe. What kind of assets can go in? Is it just business stuff?
Oh, no, it's quite broad. Your business entity itself, yes, but also real estate, commercial or personal, equipment, cash, stocks, bonds, investments, even collectibles or cryptocurrency, as we saw with Lisa.
So pretty flexible on what it can hold.
Very flexible. The key is the legal transfer of ownership into the trust structure.
Okay, great. Let's try to wrap this up with the key takeaways then.
Sounds good.
First, irrevocable trusts are powerful for protecting those high-risk business assets from lawsuits and creditors. That's the main shield.
Right. Second, potential tax benefits, especially around estate taxes, can be a significant advantage for long-term wealth preservation.
Third, they're useful for legacy planning, making sure assets go where you want, how you want.
But fourth, and it's a big but, you do give up direct control over those assets. That's the trade-off.
Fifth, setting them up involves legal complexity and costs. It needs professional help.
And finally, they aren't just for billionaires. They can be a smart strategy for many business owners looking to secure their future.
So the call to action for you listening right now.
Take that first step. Identify just one key asset in your business that feels vulnerable. What worries you most if things went wrong?
Nail down that specific asset.
Exactly. Then your next move is to book a consultation with a lawyer who specializes in trusts and asset protection. Don't delay.
And go into that meeting ready to ask the core question.
How can I use an irrevocable trust to protect my business, specifically this asset? Make it concrete.
And a final thought to leave everyone with.
Just that proactive asset protection planning ahead like this, it isn't about negativity or assuming the worst.
It's about responsibility.
It's about responsibility and preparedness. Taking smart steps now gives you peace of mind. It secures the future for your business, yourself, and your family.
Building that strong foundation so you can keep focusing on growing the business.
Precisely. So you can innovate and build without that constant nagging fear of losing it all to something unexpected. It's about long-term security.